Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the French Revolution, and we're going to go over the worksheet that you completed, the yellow worksheet with revolution questions on it from last week. So you should have that out in front of you, as well as a different color pen in order to add to your notes or correct anything you had wrong. On this slide is a painting by Gerard Delacroix. It is called Our Lady of the Revolution, and it highlights the role women played in the revolution, as well as you can see here, like the lower class. So you have peasants, etc. And then the bottom right-hand picture is Place de la Concorde, where King Louis and Marie Antoinette were brought to be beheaded. So when we look at France before the revolution, there were 3 estates. And remember, the first estate, you should take your pointer finger, point to the ceiling or the heavens, and it is the clergy. So these are priests and members of religious orders. Many were rich, but some might be just basic parish priests. Our second estate, you should take 2 fingers, put them on top of your head upside down to make funny hat symbol, which are the nobles who wore funny hats. And they were member of the noble families. So they are the lords who have family names that have been passed down for centuries. They have land, they're high up on the feudal pyramid, and pretty powerful politically, have a lot of sway over the king, let's say. And lastly, we have our third estate, which you should take 3 fingers, put upside down, and pretend they're walking in the streets. They can't afford a horse and buggy. And remember, the streets are dirty. We don't have great sanitation. Horses are defecating, etc. And it's everybody else. So it's the peasant farmers, it's the small middle class, it's the merchants, and this is roughly 95% of the population, so the majority of the population. And this is the group that forms the National Assembly and is the most upset. So France before the revolution, they had some complaints. The question was, what were the complaints of the French citizens against the king? The key complaints were that France had fought the 7 Years' War and the Revolutionary War, both more or less against Britain, and these were expensive wars. And so the King of France raised taxes, and he put most of that tax burden on the lower class. Additionally, there are famines in France. And while the peasants are starving, the king and royalty, and queen especially, are having parties. They're living lavish lifestyles. They're spending lots of money. They're building vacation homes on their property in Versailles, going hunting, etc. If you haven't finished writing, you should pause the slide now. We're going to move on. The next question was, what action did the Third Estate take in 1789? And what was the result? So in 1789, the Third Estate, when they were locked out of a meeting with the First and Second Estates, they declared themselves the National Assembly. Or in another sense, think of it as the legislature, another governing body that represented the people, the majority of France. And without the First and Second Estate, they tried to write a constitution. In this constitution, they abolished the feudal system. They declared freedom of religion. Remember, many Protestants are being persecuted. And it addressed many of the basic concerns of the Third Estate: the rights of man, natural rights, the laws, corruption in the government. And it was in 1791 that they signed and agreed on a new constitution. So in that sense alone, the French Revolution starts with a 2-year constitution building phase. And so this is before the actual revolution. Next, we shift to France during the revolution. This is our ruler of Austria. And so the question is, what did the Austrians and Prussians attempt to do after 1791? So this is after the French citizens created the constitution. Well, the Austrians and the Prussians saw the French peasants creating the constitution as a threat. They were absolute monarchs. They did not want their citizens doing the same, taking the same kind of measures to limit their power. They wanted to maintain their centralized power and without checks and balances. So the Austrians and Prussians attempted to invade France and put the king back in power and overthrow the National Assembly. However, quite impressive, the French revolutionaries were able to hold them back, and so the Prussians and Austrians were not successful. If you haven't finished writing, you should pause. So more about France during the Revolution. You see the image here on the right is the guillotine, invented by Guillotine. And it was originally seen as a way to humanely kill people because death was instant versus hanging where there could be suffering. And so it was intended to limit suffering. The question is, who were the Jacobins and what did they do? So the Jacobins were a radical French revolutionary group. They were the leaders of the initial movements of the revolution. And they helped put the royal family in prison. They grabbed them from Versailles, their kingdom or castle, about 15 miles away from Paris, and brought them to prison in Paris. And then eventually they beheaded the king and queen, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, in the center of Paris for all to see. Unfortunately, they didn't have a great plan for what to do next after the king was already beheaded. Here we go, another image of the guillotine. The basket is to catch the head. It's very gruesome. And so after the Jacobins behead King Louis, the reign of terror ensues. And it is a time of terror, you guessed it. And it's in this time the National Assembly basically undoes the good that it has done, and it gets rid of its constitution and instead institute the Committee for Public Safety. And it's led by the Jacobins. And you guessed it, the title, the Committee for Public Safety. They claimed they were acting for the good of the public. And essentially what happened is the Committee for Public Safety beheads tens of thousands of French citizens to try to control the chaos in France. And so anybody who might be, pro-king or pro-monarchy or pro-anything that was of the old systems in France, or was rumored to be by their neighbors, etc., was brought to be beheaded. So eventually, though, people get upset by the Committee of Public Safety, and they themselves are beheaded. And so the guillotine is really the only winner in this phase of the French Revolution. And we have more. The revolution goes on and gets more complicated. And in senior year, you will actually answer the question, was the French Revolution successful? And there will be questions about Napoleon and his role in the revolution. But who you see here is Napoleon Bonaparte. So the question, what was the Directory and who was its most famous member? The Directory was a council. So after the Committee of Public Safety is beheaded, we have the Directory, and they're kind of in charge of helping lead France, and it has a new constitution in 1795, and the Directory tries to follow this constitution, and its most famous member is Napoleon Bonaparte, who is a famous general, so he's been successful in warfare, and he eventually becomes Emperor of France. And so the Directory, and especially Napoleon, decides that a panel of 5 people is no way to rule a country. And so Napoleon steps up to power. And he's from the island of Corsica, which you can see is this small island south of France, but actually closer to Italy overall, where he is born on an island. He'll also die on an island. So Napoleon Bonaparte was a French general. He's born on the island of Corsica to a noble family. And in 1802, he claims the title Council for Life, which is basically Emperor of France. He says, we need some stability. I'll just be the emperor. And at this point, he still claims to be an emperor or leader of the revolution. Even though, remember, our original revolution wants a constitution, they do away with the monarchy. The goals have been very confused and forgotten. So, what effect did Napoleon's rule have on women? Because remember, women were some of the guiding force of the early revolution. Some of Napoleon's reforms reduced rights that had been won during the early revolution. For example, women lost their citizenship. So women ended up not really gaining a lot of rights during this revolution, even though in the early phases it looked like this would be a win for women. And so I want you to take a second to look at this map and look at the French Empire. You might find Italy there, right? The Italian boot with a high heel, and it's kicking Sicily. You could see the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, and then the territory that is Germany, and then over by Russia, all of which are controlled as part of a French empire. That was not part of the original plan of the revolution. So the question, how far did Napoleon's empire extend? Which areas did he conquer? At its height, Napoleon conquered most of Europe successfully. Again, he was a very successful military general, and he did so pretty quickly. Look at, this is a map of 1812, so that's 10 years after becoming Emperor of France. So he conquered the areas that are modern-day Spain, Germany, Poland, Italy, Austria. He even attempted to conquer Moscow in Russia, unsuccessfully. Remember, there's only one group that's ever done that, and it's the Mongols. Even Hitler will learn the same lesson. Don't try to conquer Russia. And so his failure in Russia towards Moscow is a turning point of his power. And so this is eventually, when Napoleon falls, the end of the revolution, and France returns to a monarchy. So essentially Napoleon was a monarch, and the France returns to a monarch without a constitution. And so the question is, was it really successful? Were the rights achieved? Something to think about. Have a great weekend.